Hello everyone, and welcome to this Build It webinar. Kindly sponsored by the Structural Timber Association, today's session is packed with expert advice to help you identify the best timber structural system for your project. I'm delighted to say we've had hundreds of people register for this session, and I can see a lot of you are already with us live, so I think we can start now. Just a little housekeeping before we get cracking. Please do submit your questions as we go using the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom window. You can upvote questions if you like them, and we'll try to prioritize those ones. And if you have any technical feedback, please use the chat button, so not the Q&A button, and one of the Build It team will try to help you. So our agenda for this session, I'll start off by giving you a brief introduction to timber systems, and then our three Structural Timber Association experts will introduce the three key options we'll be talking about today. We'll then debate some of the key considerations for choosing a timber system, and finally, we'll be taking your questions live to help you get the specific advice you need to move your project forward. So please do keep those questions coming via the Q&A button. So why should you consider a timber building system for your project? Well, they have a lot to offer self-builders, much of which is underpinned by the fact these systems are usually factory manufactured. This can give you a lot of confidence about what, at the end of the day, will be a key part of your self-build or home extension dream, namely the structural envelope of your home. Quality, costs, energy performance, and on-site scheduling are all highly predictable with timber systems. And the structural engineering side of the process is done by the same people who manufacture and erect your house shell. So this route takes a lot of the uncertainty out of the self-build process. You'll also benefit from huge choice in terms of the architecture, internal features, and of course the exact timber system you want to use. And we'll be delving into your options today. As I mentioned, this webinar is kindly sponsored by the Structural Timber Association, the STA, which is the UK's largest trade association within the timber sector. And the STA's mission is to enhance quality and drive product innovation through technical guidance and research, and that's underpinned by an independent members' quality standard assessment, the STA Assure scheme. STA Assure accreditation gives you confidence that the structural timber suppliers you partner with on your project operate to excellent quality, safety, and sustainability standards. And many warranty providers are now looking for STA Assure status as a guarantee of quality. And I'm delighted to welcome three STA experts as our panelists for today's webinar, and they are Simon Orrells from Frame Technologies, Mark Stevenson from Potton, and Tim Crump from Oakrights. Before we get into the debate, I'm going to invite each of our panelists to give you a bit of a background and quickly highlight some of the key benefits of the three systems we're looking at today. And I do mean quickly because they've got a 3-minute clock to beat. So first up, I'm delighted to welcome Simon Orrells, who is Managing Director of Frame Technologies and has over 2 decades experience in self-build timber frame construction. So without further ado, Simon, please can I invite you to take the virtual floor.
You need to let me in.
Oh, okay, 1 second. You should be able to do that now, Simon.
There we are. I'm in. Okay, everybody. Why choose timber frame for your self build? As Chris was just saying, now really, obviously one of the biggest pluses is cost certainty. It's the fastest growing off-site build system as well, and it's the most popular build system for self-builders. Speed of build is a key element of it, especially with the weather we get these days, and obviously we can build all times of the year, but obviously with planning delays, funding delays, and obviously trying to find that perfect plot, once you get all those key items, you want to get on with it, you want to get that build up and get it watertight, so speed is a massive benefit. One point of contact throughout the design, throughout the engineering, again, key benefit, environmentally friendly and a very sustainable build solution. Design flexibility, as I've always said, if it can be drawn, it can be built. Open plan living, we got engineered floors, engineered roofs these days. Obviously, a lot of you are using mechanical ventilation, ducting and services through. And majority of us now are doing building regs as the package of design. So we can take it, as soon as you've got planning, we can take it right through. And that helps the buildability of it as well. Energy efficiency and airtightness, fully insulated building envelope, breathable wall solutions from building regs down to sort of 0.09. With thin wall solutions and a fabric first approach, which is what we've been pushing for a long, long while. It delivers best value. It's not all about cheapest price these days. It's a complete build solution. So that gives you all the walls, all the floors, all the roofs, one point of contact, one engineer, one designer. It's no longer about, as I said, the cheapest material price. It's about looking at the best overall build solution. So then we'll go into the case study for Leanne Player. Leanne's, you'll have most probably seen all over the Build It magazine. We won Build It Awards with last year for the best self-build for under 250k. Just goes to show what can be built and what can be achieved with timber frame. Obviously true Herefordshire house on a lovely rural plot. But the biggest, as Leanne would say, the biggest advantage she had with that build was the early engagement with us to turn around and actually benefit from the design potential, doing the building regs and everything, get her truly built home that she's always planned on building. Future-proof, wanted to have low bills and everything else. That was used our Advantage E system, 140 closed panel system, factory insulated to a 0.19. A lot of them these days are going a lot lower than that with all the air tightness and that. So as we said earlier, they can be down to sort of 0.09. And obviously with a total build cost of 180,000, which was phenomenal for the size of the plot, bearing in mind the end value she then achieved of 460,000. So it was fantastic. That was a very, very quick run through, and we'll take questions afterwards, and I'll pass you back to Chris.
And fantastic, thanks for that, Simon. And it's amazing how much info you can pack into 3 minutes. Next up, let's welcome Mark Stevenson, who is Managing Director of Potton and has been a construction professional for almost 30 years. And Mark's here to talk to us about SIPs, although Potton do offer timber frame too. So take it away, Mark.
Thank you, Chris, and good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. So yes, I'm going to talk about SIPs and just explain what they are. A SIP is very similar to timber frame in many respects. It does the same kind of job. It forms the structural envelope, the thermal envelope of your house. So really, from your point of view as self-builders, you should think of SIPs as the structure for the whole house. But it does it in a slightly different way to a timber frame. A timber frame would have lots of structural studs that make those walls and floors and roofs stand up, whereas a SIP is made in a way to have 2 layers of what's called oriented strand board bonded to structural insulation, and therefore the loads that have to be carried through that system are transferred in a way that we can maintain a continuous jacket of insulation to improve the thermal performance of your house. So what you end up with a SIP is a very robust structure, because those OSB boards are quite thick, usually 15 millimeters, but it has exceptional thermal performance. And it does that by reducing things like thermal bridging, has a lot less structural studs in it, and that lowers your bills. And that's why self-builders look to use SIPs wherever they possibly can. Now, we do at Potton use both systems, and what I can say is, whilst it's the Rolls Royce of building systems, timber systems, it will cost you a little bit more. So you do have to weigh up the balance between cost and performance. A SIP would have all the same advantages as a timber frame. It'll be rapid to build. It's an off-site system. It has very robust air tightness as well. We tend to use it where we're building commercial buildings that have to have exceptional air tightness, like passive house, or maybe a commercial building that might be knocked and bruised around by its use, maybe a school extension, things like that. So it's a really robust system. Should we move on to the next one, Chris? I wanted to talk about this case study because it's an excellent example of the architectural challenges a SIP can meet. So this is a case study from Mr. and Mrs. J, who wanted to build a really high-end contemporary house. And you only have to look at some of these photographs to see all those vaulted spaces and the engineering challenges that this contained within it. And SIPs, in this case, unlocked all that potential and created I'm sure you will agree, a fantastic space to live in. So this house had green roofs on top, which would have had a lot more loads to carry, and the SIP was perfect for that situation. And as you can see, the clients, whilst it's not the biggest house in the world, had a very high quality, high budget, but the end value was tremendous. So they certainly got a lot of bang for their buck from the end point of view. And I think that's it from me, Chris.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mark. And now we're going to ask Tim Crump to join us. So Tim is the owner of Oakrights and has over 30 years experience in oak framing. And he's now seen his fellow STA experts speak, so he's got a chance to try and get one over on them before we start the Q&A section. So Tim, can I ask you to introduce Stoic Framing?
Good evening, Chris and audience. Really, we're slightly different to the other two products showed, but similar in a lot of ways. So with oak framing, really one of the things you need to think about, why would you use oak frame? Well, it's character. It's the look of the building. And I'm sure you will all have seen in the magazine lots of oak frames. They always stand out in the articles within the magazines. And that is because the oak frame, unlike the other systems, is actually shown as a feature within the house. So you can see the oak frame within the building, and that's the great character. Sustainability. Oak frame, oak trees are being replanted all the time. We buy from sustainable forests throughout Europe. So you are building with a material that is constantly being replanted. And then linked in with the encapsulation system where we use recycled newsprint within our right wall system, you then have a sustainable product surrounding the oak frame, which is what you see within the house. And with sustainability, longevity. Any oak frame that we build, we would expect to last for literally centuries. And that is 200-300 years. And this is, it's not really just because of the quality of the build that we use or the way that we construct our oak frames. What I always say to our customers is we cannot give our oak frames 150 years. And within 150 years onwards, the oak frame will only look better. So like a piece of antique furniture, it gains patina with age, and you very rarely ever see oak frames being knocked down. So that is why they will last for so long. So if we can move on to the next slide, please, Chris. So oak framing, the encapsulation system, and we'll speak about insulation. Insulation, we use cellulose insulation with our breathing wall. And we start off at between 0.5 for the walls and 0.12. And we can actually build to a much higher level than that. But that really takes us into the passive house area. With the cellulose insulation, we have a breathable wall. It's a breathable wall system. So this means that the atmospheric moisture within the house is drawn to the outside shell and then evaporates. So giving a very healthy living environment within the house. Old historic homes would have been built with lime mortar and lime render and lime plaster. So that actually breathes itself, and really the breathing wall system works like that. It enables your house to breathe. So it's a little bit like wearing a Gore-Tex jacket. Yes, a panda suit would keep you dry, but it probably wouldn't feel so great inside, whereas a Gore-Tex jacket will, and that's a little bit like the breathable wall system. Air tightness. I mentioned air tightness here. With passive house, you have to gain 0.6 air exchange at 50 pascals, which on a normal timber frame is quite straightforward, really. But when you have an oak frame inside, there are some particular challenges to meet. And we were the first oak framing company in the country to achieve a full passive house certification with an oak frame. And we've gone on to build further passive houses since, so we're becoming very knowledgeable on that front, and it is quite a challenge, but we can do that. So the insulation, it's natural, it's recycled newsprint, which we feel is great for sustainability. So linked with the oak frame, the two elements there, you gain a very sustainable structure and system. And I think that's my introduction. Thank you, Chris.
And I'll be getting things started with a few frequently asked questions for our STA experts before we move on to answering your specific questions. So please do keep them coming in via the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window. So Simon, I think we'll start with you. You mentioned it briefly about early engagement. So at what exact point should self-builders and home extenders be bringing a timber system company on board with their project?
Obviously now we're getting involved from a point of building regs. I think really as soon as people have got planning or they're in for planning, they need to start to be talking to their build system, especially with lead times and that these days, because they've got a good idea of what they actually want, and the earlier they can get involved in that build system, then the better value they will achieve from it. Like that, really. You can't keep chopping around the different systems. You're better off to try and work with the one system you choose with early doors. And as I said, they can start doing the building regs, start running the design, and make best use of that resource and that knowledge.
Great. And anyone got anything to add on that one? Mark, anything on that? Or
Say the question again, Chris. I didn't quite catch it.
Just about how early you should engage with your timber system company.
Yeah, as early as possible. And the reason for that is not because we want you to engage with us, but don't forget your home has to be architecturally designed, and your architectural design must be based upon the build system that you adopt. So there's no point designing a building for whatever other technology you might choose and then splitting or changing halfway through. Your architect is going to fall out with you and send you a big bill for redrawing your house. So it's much better to try and think early and say, well, that's how I want to build it. Therefore, I can design the architecture to suit that and make things such as building reg compliance absolutely lined up to that building system and the architectural work.
Great. We'll move on to the next question. Tim, I think we'll put this one to you. Are there any design restraints when you're using timber building systems?
Well, with an oak frame, you need to really engage early on with the design. And the oak frame, you're going to see the oak frame inside your house. So because of that, it is a feature. It is a feature of the whole design. So you really need a company who understand how to design an oak frame, how to work with oak frame to get the very best. And what I mean there is we can make an oak frame fit to virtually any design. However, normally that will mean more cost. So if you work with an architect who fully understands how oak framing works early on, then through simplicity, you can gain a much better looking house. So really it is a less is more situation. Sometimes and quite frequently, less oak gives a better looking oak frame. So that is, so again, early on, as you possibly can. And when we say self-builders and custom builders, normally they have a good idea of what they're looking for. So with those ideas, bring them to the company early on and discuss your design.
Great. And Simon, is there anything else you'd add about the design flexibility with timber systems?
No, like obviously these days, because it's an engineered solution, as we've been saying, and as I'm always saying, if it can be drawn, it can be built these days. And to a certain extent, we're talking about 3 different timber systems tonight, but it's one of those where we can, again, design flexibility, we can hybridize those to bring them all into play, really, where we can have a timber frame with a SIPS roof and sort of oak features. And I think that's the way we're going these days. It's not just having one size fits all, i.e. where you'll have a timber frame sat over an ICF basement or something. You've got to be, nowadays we can actually look at the best system to suit that design. But yeah, at the end of the day now, we shouldn't be restricting the design potential of the property for the system, for the build system.
Great. One for you, Mark. What should the people in our audience be looking for in a good timber system supplier?
Well, I think it's all about compliance and accreditations, and also making sure that the supplier that you're working with you trust, and they're going to do a proper professional job. I think you've already alluded to the answer with the STA Assure. And the great thing about our industry, it's a mature timber industry. And if you go to the STA's website, you'll find possibly hundreds of different manufacturers, all accredited and all wanting to do it in the right way. They follow the governance the industry sets. So I think anyone that's part of that scheme I think there's a big dose of trust you can put into them, and you can quite happily work alongside them. And provided they sit and try and understand your project and don't try and turn your project into something that's convenient for them, you'll find a great engineered timber system manufacturer out there, of which we might be three, but there's many others.
Fantastic. I think that was pretty comprehensive. So let's move on to the next one. Simon, are systems like timber frame suitable for extensions as well as new homes?
Yes. Simple answer. But as we've always said, it's one of those these days, we can connect a timber frame to any existing structure. And a lot of times timber frame, or even as Mark will say with SIPs, can be used for extensions because they want them quick and they want a lighter form of construction, especially with first floor extensions on existing foundations. But the one thing I keep saying to people these days is that an extension can be anything from 10 square meters to 300 square meters, and really start look at your for a timber frame system or an offsite system. I think you want to start to be looking at 75 square meters and above as the yardstick. Below that, it's not cost effective using an offsite system, and so in some ways you sort of use that to steer it. You could still stick build it on site or use one of the other systems, because once you get smaller than that, and sometimes they're only 12, 14 square meters, it's just not cost effective. But yes, you can. You just need to look at the integration to the existing. And obviously people say, well, what's the square meter price for an extension? Every extension's different, because obviously you've got to match to the existing, match the floor levels, matching to the existing walls and stuff. So there's a lot more interfaces with the timber frame. And really you want to try and work with a local supplier for that as well. You want somebody within an hour of site. You don't want to be trying to sort of lug somebody across the country for that.
Okay, anyone feel they can do a smaller extension than 75 meters?
What I would say, Chris, is don't confuse your house. So if you've got a timber frame house, extend it with timber frame. If you've got a masonry house, extend it with masonry. And the reason why I say that, it's not that one technology is better than the other. When you go and get your insurance or a mortgage, you don't want to sit there trying to explain to the mortgage broker that you've got a bit of a mixed bag, because they're going to go, really? Don't understand that. You might make mortgageability hard by confusing and mixing up materials. So try and keep your house honest and consistent.
Well, that's an interesting one there, actually, Mark, because we find a great amount of our business is actually adding on oak frame additions, that is sunrooms, garden rooms and barn rooms onto houses. Now, quite often those will be oak framed houses that we're adding on to, but quite often they will be masonry, which is, because I think some of the oak frame, the best looking part of an oak frame is the roof structure, and you see the structure of an oak frame. So as a single story addition onto a house, it does work really, really well to give that feature, that wow factor area to the house.
I think you need to ring Tim then.
There we go.
I'll leave the email address at the end if you need it.
I don't think he's going to mind. So let's go back, Mark. Which system do you reckon is quickest to build with?
To be honest, they're all pretty similar, and speed really depends on the architectural form from a timber system point of view. I think lots of people have a perception that SIPs is quicker than timber frame, and I think that's a bit of marketing. At the end of the day, it's a panelized offsite manufactured system, and timber frame will just be as speedy as SIPs and vice versa. And I know Tim, with his oak framing, encapsulates using timber frame or a hybrid system, and that'll have the same kind of virtues as well. So expect the same kind of performance, to be perfectly honest, which is rapid in all cases.
I think the speed side comes down to back to, as Mark was saying, design. The more simple your design is, the less corners, the less joins you have, the faster it will be. We would tend to build the panel as large as we possibly can. So if we get an articulated lorry onto site, we'll build the panels up 10 meters long with the window and door openings in, and also the windows and doors can be installed within the panel system as well. On the roofs, we'll actually, if there are dormer windows, we'll construct the whole dormer window onto the roof panel in the workshop. So when that panel is being craned onto the house, you're not only craning the panel on, but you are craning on a completed dormer window, which as a carpenter, I know that on site, while I may think I can build a dormer window in a day, I normally find that 2 days or 2.5 days later, I'm still there fiddling around with that dormer, where as if it's built in the workshop, it adds a lot of speed onto site. But I would say good, simple design will enable your whichever panel system to work very efficiently for you.
Let the youngsters take over, Tim. They can do it quicker.
And Simon, I guess in a slightly similar vein, is there one system that's more cost effective, or are there things that self-builders can think about to make their timber build more cost effective?
I think, as I said, it all goes down to design, and it's looking at that design, or looking at the design early doors, really, with the claddings and what's in, because all the systems are very similar like that. So.
Just to add to that, I think as well as cost effective, you need to think about value for money. Now, where do you find your value? You might want to spend more on the system to be higher performance and have lower bills later, and therefore build up to maybe a passive house standard, which is the best house building efficiency standard you can find. But not everybody wants to do that. So you might want to lower your cost by lowering the performance and maybe sell that house on. So you need to find your value where you think value resides.
And presumably it's you guys who are going to help people make that decision.
Definitely.
And I would say also with when you're thinking oak frame, well, oak frame does cost. The oak itself is an expensive product. So you need to think about, again, Mark said, are you going to sell the house on? If you're going to sell on, you may like to have some oak frame, but we would not design as much oak into that house as if it was going to be your dream home. So regarding being cost effective, it is about what you're going to be doing with the house, how long you're going to be living. Is it your forever home? Well, in that case, it's more about the value to you, so the cost is different. Whereas if you're going to build the house to sell, we would use the oak frame to add the wow factor, just enough wow factor to give you the rise in value by using the oak frame. So that is where so while it might not be as cheap as such as another system, you're adding value by adding a higher sellout price for the house by using the oak frame.
I guess it's about sort of prioritizing your budget on the design features and the performance features that are most important to you, isn't it? Okay, and Tim, is it easy to get a mortgage on a timber built home?
Well, mortgages all round, I think, are becoming more challenging at the present moment. So yes, it is straightforward, but you have to be methodical. And again, it comes down to which company you're working with, or reputable companies within the timber frame industry will have a track record of gaining mortgages on their houses. By working with companies such as Build Store, for instance, who specialize in self-build mortgages, if they're working with a company who carry out the full design process, the building regulations for their product, and can provide all the details all the way through, and possibly the project management and construction, it is going to make it a little bit more easy to gain that mortgage. And it's probably by working with a specialist company who have a good track record. So that can be any one of the systems. A company got a good track record really will help you gain the mortgage.
Can I just add to that, Chris? I think it's a really good idea that wherever you get your mortgage from, you understand the rules that the mortgage lender expects you to follow. Now, in our British market, we're a little bit odd, and we're stuck in the 70s with probably houses that had defects like flat roofs. So they don't like you to have too much of a flat roof. So they might restrict the percentage there. They will definitely want you to have cavities, because we're a wet climate, and that's a really good defense to making sure it keeps the weather out. So don't use a system that doesn't have a cavity, otherwise you're going to run into a problem. And I suppose from our point of view, being good old British-based builders, we would respect and know all those little kind of rules that has to be followed. So make sure you follow them.
Great. And just one final one, which I think you can probably all answer. So we'll start with Mark. But do you find that most of your self-builders get involved in, say, the project management or construction works with a SIPS house?
Yes, and that percentage of people is growing more and more and more. And I don't know if that's because there's an ambition for people to build the house themselves, to say, I built that, or it's a necessity that the professional resources aren't so easily acquired these days. And it's probably, the truth is, a bit of a mix of the two. And I think the reason why timber systems are so attractive is it enables people to build their own house, because you've kind of set the DNA of the house really quickly, really easily, by using a manufacturer that stitches all these things together. I know in our case, customers are out wanting to do it more and more, but they also want us to do more and more. So these days, we don't just do the frame, we also do the roof tiling, install the windows, do all the joinery, and we get them a little bit further down the path of a watertight package, and then they've got the fit out to do, and they feel a bit more confident about that. So I think it's on the growth at the moment, Chris.
Excellent. Tim, anything to add to that one?
Well, we will do as much or as little as a customer requires. And if it's within a day range of our offers, we'll build out completely for the customer. So do more people want to get involved themselves? Probably years ago, I would say we found that people did do more than themselves. And we're probably finding now that people, while they want to manage it themselves, they are, as Mark said, asking and requiring us to do a lot more of the project for them. And I think that probably is the complexity of building regulations these days. So it gives people comfort and security in knowing that they're going to get the house to the airtightness requirement of building regulations. And we can take that all the way through to dry shell, but then also to complete fit out if it's within striking distance or where we work with one of our partner builders throughout the country.
And Simon, how do you tend to work with your clients?
As Mark was saying, it's on the increase now, whereas self-builders were sort of splitting everything down into sort of subcontractor packages. I think with the regs moving up and trying to tie subcontractors down, they're wanting the timber frame company to do bigger packages. And so, as both have said, really, now we're finding they're wanting their foundations, they're wanting joinery, they're wanting water, they're wanting to take that build off the critical path. So once it's watertight, foundations, windows, cladding, roof coverings, they're inside, they're a bit more in their comfort zone. And it's almost like that's stage one. They then can sort of look at the budget and start stage two inside, and that's where they can do more themselves. But yeah, it's ironic how the mindset is changing quite a lot now, that it's becoming more package management now, really, and changing all the time. And I think that's going to increase more and more, and package for us is getting bigger and bigger.
Fantastic. Right, things are about to get a little tougher for you guys, I think, because we're going to move on to our Q&A section with our audience. And our first one is definitely a teaser for Mark. Ben has said, I'm worried about using SIPs due to longevity and potential toxic fumes emittance from the material between the wood. Do you have any comments on that?
Yes, it's one of my favourite ones, if you like, to try and answer. I've been asked this question before. Now, in terms of toxic fumes, I think you're referring to formaldehyde. So that's the chemical given off by pretty much every natural occurring material out there, including insulation. We don't want too much of this in our homes. It's measured in parts per million, and above a certain level, it's not healthy. Now, the good news is, if you measured the formaldehyde given off of a rotting pear, you'll find more given off by that than the build system that you sat in. And we know that because we've measured and done tests of the formaldehyde that we might have in our factories, because we've got people working there. So actually, whilst it's a good question, I don't think you've got anything to worry about from that respect when it comes to a timber building system. In terms of longevity, timber frames have been around a long time, and SIPs have been around 2 or 3 decades now. It's quite old technology. It feels new. It's probably marketed as being the next generation of timber frame, but actually it's quite long in the tooth. And that means we've got quite a lot of history to know how to actually put a timber frame together and make sure it will perform in its longevity. So when you go back to the mortgage companies who are really interested in making sure your homes have longevity, because they need it to have value, you'll find that timber frames and SIPs are easily mortgageable, provided you follow the rules to make sure it has the longevity that you're looking for.
Great, thanks, Mark. And Stuart has asked, after all the mentions of passive house, is one of these options better than the others for a passive house? So should we start with Tim?
Well, back to what I was saying earlier, I think you need to look, whichever system you go for, ideally you want as few joins as possible in the panel system, because really where the air tightness is one of the elements that is a principal challenge within building any house to passive house standard, is the joins. So the less joins you've got, so the bigger panels covering more area, the less points to join on site, make it a lot more straightforward. So is one system better than the other? I would probably say not, depending on the quality of the build. So if the company that you pick to work with, and then it is the quality of the build, and do that company have a track record of building passive houses on a regular basis?
Fantastic. Simon, anything to add from your perspective on that one?
No, I would say the timber systems are quite good at achieving passive, whether it be passive standards or passive certification. And it's not all about just filling more insulation in the panels. As Tim said, you're trying to reduce the amount of breaks in the panels, but also it's about trying to reduce the thermal bridging and that in the panels. And to a certain extent, it's about making sure the design's right in the first place. It's no good designing the house, then deciding to turn and build a passive house. You need to have that thought process there early doors.
Could I just add to that, Chris? And the reason why I want to add to that is because we build a lot of passive houses under contract with builders. We would only build a passive house using a SIP. And I don't really care which one you want from us. We do both timber frame or SIP. And the reason why we only do it in SIP is because the air tightness is really robust. You don't want it to be leaky at the end. So yes, it's got all the thermal bridging removed, but if you give a Stanley knife to a tradesman, they might run around cutting membranes, and then therefore you've got a problem. Whereas with the SIP, because the air tightness is provided by the OSB layers, which are 15 millimeters, it's really hard to wreck it, and therefore it's durable during the construction process. So we've learned that only build a passive house with a SIP.
Interesting. We've had a sort of related question from Alexander asking about the overall wall thickness that might be required to reach passive house standard and whether it's different between different systems. Mark, do you want to carry on?
402 millimeters for SIP.
Okay.
It is. Just I know what it is.
There you go, Simon.
Can't argue with that, can we? We had that one written down.
Yeah, I mean they can all be reasonably thin. The point is these are off-site manufactured systems where the insulation can be put in as part of the construction process, isn't it?
There are. And there's another point, Chris, and that is it's not only gaining the U value to gain the passive house, really it's looking at how the actual wall system works as well. So you can go for a thinner, lighter system, and then that you'll gain the U value to be super efficient. But also, if you won't go for a slightly thicker system with more density, it can help to keep the house cooler in the summer. So therefore, throughout the whole year, you're gaining a more comfortable living environment, but you would be losing some space. So if space is a premium, then obviously a thinner system is better for you and you're still gaining passive house. If you've got more space to be able to give more depth of panel, well, then you could go for more denser panel system, and therefore it would give you the decrement delay, so it wouldn't heat up so much. So a house would be cooler in the summer and then as warm in the winter, but overall giving you a more comfortable living environment throughout the year within your house.
Great. We've had one anonymously, but what are the internal walls like for soundproofing compared to, say, a solid block internal wall? Do you want to take that one, Simon?
That's always one of my bugs. People have this perception that timber frame, because timber frame is a lightweight form of construction, that it's a noisy form of construction. And sometimes in the early days, there were issues with internal noise. But currently, it's like any of the systems. If it's built to design, then there's not a problem. And these days, whether it be like even with terraced houses and that now with party walls, timber frame and timber system actually performs better than masonry. So it's one of those where whether it be wall to wall or floor to floor, as long as it's built as per design, then there's not a problem.
Could I just add to that, Chris?
Yep.
I've probably had a hand in about 10,000 houses working for volume house builders before my career with Potton, and most of those were masonry. And not one of them had masonry internal walls. They all had timber stud or metal stud. And therefore they had exactly the same wall as a timber frame would have from an internal partition point of view. Yes, there might have been a few load bearing walls, but they would generally only be on the ground floor, not the first floor. And the reason why they build them in the same lightweight technology is because they're all built off the same floors. So we all use the same floor joists. So you get exactly the same performance as prescribed by building regulations. And you have to make sure you've got the same level of acoustic quilting there, which is 10 kgs per meter cubed as a spec.
Great, thanks, Mark. I've had a question from James. What's the need for an architect versus just using the company's own team, and how can you avoid doubling up on costs? Should we give that one to Tim first?
Well, that's an interesting one. When we say the company's own team, we have a full architectural department with 8 architects working full-time designing, and they are architects. So it is like an architectural practice, but within a company. Now, you could say, well, are they biased towards designing what the company builds? Yes, they probably are. Do they know what the company builds and how to get the best out of what the company builds? Yes, they do. So there are great advantages. I always say we can, as I mentioned earlier, we can build, and Simon, I think, said, we can build, if it can be drawn, we can build it. That doesn't mean it's good design. So, and if you work with an architect who fully understands oak framing, then you will get a better design and you will save money, because we can make it work to any design, but it will cost. So you're better off working with a team who fully understand the product. So it could be generally timber framing, it could be somebody who really works with SIPs all the time, or it could be an architect who works with oak frame.
Great. Now we always promise ourselves we won't compare what we're talking about to other systems, but I think it's a valid one. Peter's asked, can you give us some idea of the relative cost of these options compared to traditional brick and block? Simon, would you like to start?
I think as we always say, these days there's not a lot of difference in the cost of the systems when they're built to the performance, and that's the key thing, is making sure they're built to the actual performance. To be fair, and it's one of those that you need to look at the design and decide more, rather than the cost of it, which system you want to work with and the value of that system. But no, they'll all sit. You can't really, these days, it's not about a square meter rate, and people say, well, how much a square meter is it? You can't, because there's so many options, there's so many specification changes with it like that. You can't do that. But if you're going to try and, once you've got a specification to it, there's not a lot of difference in each of them once you weigh everything up. And actually, the higher the specification, so the lower the U value, when you look at overall cost, you'll actually find out the timber systems are coming out better value.
Great, thanks for that.
Could I just add to that? Because I've just done some work on costs. Your superstructure is going to cost about 25% of your budget, typically. And therefore, what you find when you look at the different systems, if you express the cost to build as a per square metre of gross internal floor area, and that's how builders talk, your superstructure is going to cost somewhere between 250 to 400. Simon's quite right, depending on specification, thermal performance, architectural flexibility and complexity and all those different things. And Simon's also quite right that you've got to think about your cost not from an elemental point of view, i.e. what will that wall cost versus something else. You've got to think about the whole project. So what's the impact of choosing one system and what costs will it cost you as a result of going with one or another? So you can buy masonry, blockwork cheaper, but you will be on site longer and you'll have more scaffold at higher costs, so you'll have more supervision and you'll have more weather delays and your build will take longer. And that has to be paid for. So when you add those two things together, studies have proven that it is very similar cost on the outturn from your project. So that's kind of the ballpark you're playing in, really.
Also, I would add when you add an oak frame, and you are adding an element which does cost additional money. So it would make oak framing slightly more expensive. But then depending upon where the plot is, what the outlook is, if it is your forever home, then that can be considered to be worthwhile. So when we get down to the nitty-gritty, how much does it cost? At the present moment, we are finding the total build-out cost of our houses is ranging anywhere from about £2,600 a metre up to anything like about £3,600 a metre. And that depends on fixtures and fittings really throughout the build and the quality of the design or the complexity of the design.
Great. Well, thanks for that, guys. And because you've all decided to answer that one, I think we've run out of time now. You know, we got through as many as we could there. And I have to say, there are an awful lot of questions. We've got 69 in total. So what I can say is that although we haven't been able to answer all of your questions now, our STA experts, Simon, Mark and Tim, thank you to all of them for sharing their time and their knowledge. If you do have additional questions, or you want to put the questions you've asked on the Q&A system directly to us, you can email buildit@castlemedia.co.uk, and we will help to put you in touch with the right STA expert to get the answer to those questions. So a huge thank you to Tim, to Mark and to Simon. And thank you once again to the Structural Timber Association for helping to make this hugely informative webinar happen. And you can find out more about the STA and search for your ideal project partner at www.structuraltimber.co.uk. And thank you all for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this session and are feeling more confident in how to approach choosing the right timber system for your project. We will be running another webinar with the STA experts in July, when we'll be focusing particularly on eco homes and how building with timber can offer you a fantastic route to a sustainable and energy efficient home. So do look out for that. And thank you and see you next time.